I don't know if I could tell if a director has never acted before or not, but I know
Mm,
it messed with me in terms of acting for a
interesting.
long time because I was so aware that a certain lens or certain lighting will change the performance.
Right.
No matter what I do, if I'm like my camera, if I'm like way back here, it's going to play differently that I'm right here,
Right.
or if the lighting changes, or I realized there were so many elements that were affecting the performance that I was holding on to those. It took me a while to try to forget about the camera. Years, literally
Right.
years, because I
Never
was
heard an
so,
actor express that before. That's
yes.
cool.
It was even like when you were going in for auditions, I remember just like you'd walk into the room and you'd be like, oh, this lighting is horrible. There's no way it's going to serve this audition.
Right.
And so that was, I'd be thinking that, and then I'd blow the audition.
Good day, filmmaker Ntare Guma Mbaho Mwine of the film Memories of Love Returned. Ntare, how are you on this fine afternoon?
I'm so grateful to be chatting with you. Thank you for making time in your schedule, and thank you for interest in my project.
The film is tremendous. Memories of Love Returned. It felt like this love letter to so many things, right? Uganda, the memories of the photography, just like the community. You talk about your family. It's just moving to watch the film. And it feels like you both know Uganda and you better. One of the things that it touched upon didn't actually cover 100% was how you got involved in filmmaking. So I'd love to hear that story about how you decided to both appear both in front of the camera and behind it.
Thanks. Have my dad to blame because he had cameras, like he loved taking photographs. And so I finagled his cameras from a young age. And I became like the family photographer anytime we went on trips. And back in those, we had those little, he had a 35 millimeter Pentax Asahi camera, which he bought to take pictures of me when I was born. And I used that camera for ages, for decades, literally. And I remember my siblings wanted to get a camera as well, but they chose to have the Polaroid where I would spit out the Polaroid picture. So
Right.
I stuck with the old 35 millimeter and take it to the lab, develop. And I'm like in none of the family photographs from like a certain age because I was always
Int-
the one behind the camera. And my dad had a little, I think it was a camera, video camera. And I would make home movies with that. It was just at a young age that I took interest in the camera and shooting. And I think that was before I was doing any acting. I was shooting behind the camera.
Do you feel like that was your, I mean, it sounds like that was your first love was like shooting and making films. And
Yeah.
then the acting came on later. Was that like to break into the industry? Have you always just prioritized the filmmaking portion of it versus the acting? Or are they both just, it's almost two separate mediums, like asking you to which child you love the most? It can't be viewed as like one or the other.
I think they're intertwined. But I got to say, the first little film I made on my dad's camera was, I wasn't in it. I filmed my brother and did this. He had a little Batman doll, and we pretended, I just did a stop motion thing with that
Oh,
Batman.
cool.
Came to the edge of the bed, and then we hit the bed. He lifted the bed up, the Batman, and it was shook it. And my brother, and then I cut to a shot of my brother in the bed looking like shaking. Then he looks down to the floor and he sees the Batman is shaking the bed. So that was my first thing that I shot, but I wasn't in it, and I hadn't thought put myself in it. Um, the later short films that I made, I was front and center there. I put myself
Okay.
in. But that was partly because I couldn't hire. I was shooting on the run and gun. I didn't have a hire an actor or crew. It was like I was trying to take advantage of the locations that I was in for work to try to shoot some experimental work. And so I was a one man band, so I had to put myself in there.
Do you think that like informs your filmmaking in a way that helps out? Like when you're acting, can you tell the directors that have never acted before?
I don't know if I could tell if a director has never acted before or not, but I know
Mm,
it messed with me in terms of acting for a
interesting.
long time because I was so aware that certain lens or certain lighting will change the performance.
Right.
No matter what I do, if I'm like my camera, if I'm like way back here, it's going to play differently that I'm right here,
Right.
or if the lighting changes, or I realized there were so many elements that were affecting the performance that I was holding on to those. It took me a while to try to forget about the camera. Years, literally years.
Right.
'Cause I
Never
was
heard an
so,
actor express that before.
yeah,
That's
so
cool.
it was even like when you were going for auditions, I remember just like you'd walk into the room and you'd be like, oh, this lighting is horrible. There's no way it's going to serve this audition.
Right.
And so that was, I'd be thinking that, and then I'd blow the audition.
Wow. So it almost matters more the knowledge as an actor to know like the lighting and the lens and that than it might as a director.
No, I think each needs to know them. But for
Right.
me, as a director, somebody who's used to shooting, it adversely affected my work as an actor because I was always aware of the
Wow.
setup. And I was like, oh, maybe I was trying to direct the thing that I wasn't hired to direct.
Right.
Shift.
Oh man. So
Well,
maybe my next guest will be like some of your directors to see what that experience was like.
yeah. So yeah, it literally took me a while. I taught a class at USC in the grad acting
Okay.
program, and to help demystify the camera for the students in that course that I taught actually helped me to demystify the camera. Even now, I'm just realizing I've been looking at your image here,
Right.
but I
And
know
when
for
the
the people who
camera
are
is up there.
the people who are viewing, it'll be better for me to just look into the lens. So I'm already messing myself up just honestly.
No. So, Memories of Love Returned is a fantastic film. I loved just like the personality of it. Can you tell people what they should expect to see when they sit down and watch it?
Well, the title speaks to it all. It's about lost images that somehow are returned. And you can just imagine like all the photos that you have on your phone, all the photos that you have in the cloud, or even hard copies that you've had. And imagine those are all wiped away and lost. And not just yours, but whole community, whole region, or whole district. And not just one phone, but for over a 5-decade period, all those images were lost. And then one
Wow.
day mounted in a large outdoor exhibit. So that's in essence what this film is about, is mounting 5 decades worth of work for a particular region in Uganda, and people coming and discovering long lost relatives, family members they'd never seen before, photos that had been lost. So it was blew my own expectations of what I thought would happen. And I think people were shocked because they didn't know that these photos even existed,
Right.
or those that did know they existed were shocked that they could somehow come back. Yeah.
So it marks the return to the documentary field for you. You made your first documentary in 2004. How did your decision making change when you made this film? One of the things I noticed was that you went into talking about sort of your personal story as part of how it intersects. And I
Mhm.
thought that was very touching. Do you think you would have made that decision on your first documentary? Can you talk a little bit about what you've learned in those 20 years since you made your first documentary and how that impacted this film?
That first documentary was called Beware of Time, and it was when I toured Uganda with my solo performance play Biro and was doing workshops for HIV/AIDS advocacy with local community advocates, health workers. So it was really about their stories, and I was just a fly on the wall to try to capture their
Right.
stories and tell their stories. The difference with this documentary was I was almost front and center because the audience sees this story through my eyes, whereas that first documentary, it's not so much through me that you get to learn about the world. You hear it firsthand from the people. So there was definitely more revealed from me personally in this second one. And that decision fought against, to be honest. I didn't want this to be
Really?
about me. I wanted it to be about the work and about Kibaate. But I think for anyone who is not familiar with the world or with Kibaate, they needed a window in.
Right.
I realized that I had no escape. It had to be me. And there's some very personal matters shared. And there was things that I discovered about my own personal health that I didn't know in the process of filming that were going to end up being in the film. But at a certain point, I realized that it would help tell the story in a clear fashion. It would also connect with audiences in a way that if I hadn't shared that, might not have. And also, those health struggles also connected to the idea of preserving and restoring Kibaate's work, because I, in essence, was trying to restore and preserve my own health, and did the same with his work. Yeah.
And it turned out tremendous. It was a tremendous decision that you made. So his work captures LGBTQ couples in a way that, as you explore, is people are surprised about in Uganda, and you explore where that goes. It's one of the more touching parts of the film. How do you view those stories going forward? Do you feel like Uganda is making progress? And then back here in the United States, I think the LGBTQ people are feeling attacked as well in the last few weeks. I certainly think that translates to filmmakers here. Do you see like a change coming in maybe not positive way for these kind of couples and these kind of films?
Yeah, I gotta say, I've received some pushback because a lot of the folks who are in photographs have passed. And so we don't know what their sexual orientation was. We can say they were same sex friendships, but I don't know actually what their orientation was. But I left it open in terms of the story because it's open to interpretation. Some people were very upset by the idea that it was open to interpretation, and were saying this in no way, shape, or form were those people same sex couples.
Right.
I've gotten a lot of pushback from that. But then there's also people in the Ugandan LGBT community who say, we don't know what their story was, and it shouldn't matter. They should be free to be whoever they
Whoever they
are, and we
were.
shouldn't lump our own biases on these photos. And so I had reached out to several advocates, LGBTQ advocates in Uganda, and had them give their feedback on the photos and their own personal journeys. And there has been some pretty draconian laws that have been passed in Uganda regarding LGBTQ. And I think what the film does was it highlights the importance of just being able to hold hands with your friend,
Right.
and not feel like you're stigmatized for that. And that has partly been lost as a result of some of the bills that have been passed recently, where people feel not as free.
Right.
Yeah. And we're seeing the same sort of clamp down in terms of the LGBT community in the States and pockets around the world. It's not something that's unique to Uganda. It's a global fight that the saying, "A luta continua," the struggle continues.
Right. And don't you feel is that to be a great filmmaker, you almost have to ignore that noise and say, you know what, I'm going to make what I think is right to make, that is true to my values. And then, as much I know it's difficult to do, it's easy to say this, difficult to do, and then put forward the film that you want to make, rather than think, I need to make my film based on whatever the political currents are.
Yeah, it's a tough call. I think everyone has their own slant. Some people want to do
Right.
something that's not gonna get caught up by the censors, and some people
Right.
want to go straight for pushing all those buttons. I wasn't necessarily trying to push all the buttons, but when this bill was passed and I had these photographs that Kibaate took, I thought this was a way to open up this discussion in a way I wouldn't have been able to do. So, in essence, that bill opened up this door to figure out how to frame these photographs that Kibaate took.
Phenomenal. So it's showing at Slamdance. Why Slamdance? Does the festival have a certain meaning to you? Can you talk about the decision to screen it there?
Yeah, it's actually in the coming weeks, this month, it's screening at 4 festivals at the Pan African Film Festival
Wow.
this Friday, February
Okay.
14th and 16th, at Slam Dance on February 22nd, at the Big Sky Documentary Film Festival, February 16th,
Love it.
at the FESPACO in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, February 28th, Slamdance is the festival where I screened my short film, Kuhani, where it was nominated for Best Short Film. That festival's by filmmakers, for filmmakers. It really feels like it's a bunch of ragtag filmmakers.
Right?
Do it yourself by any means necessary. They're not a lot of first-time filmmakers who aren't backed by major studios. They're just some shoestrings and some chewing gum and just
Gumption.
and that for me spoke to my heart, because that's how I started off. And this film, in a way, is that same thing. I just started off by myself shooting without a crew, without help at the beginning. It was just me, one man banding it. I feel like I'm with my tribe of filmmakers at Slamdance, and I'm so grateful that it's going to be part of their spotlight screenings.
Oh, that's so fantastic. So you mentioned several festivals that it's screening at. Do you have an idea of when it might be available for larger scale viewing? And can you talk a little bit about what you're working on next?
Yeah, I hope and pray that from these upcoming screenings this month that we'll get some distribution, or get some
Yeah.
inroads and insight into how the film could be seen on a wider basis. This is definitely the biggest platform that the film will be screened on. So I'm hoping that, the film will be able to be seen by a wider audience. But let's see. Maybe we can have that conversation. We can come back and say, yes, this conversation we had, somebody saw this interview and said,
I
oh,
hope
this film
so.
doesn't have distribution yet.
That would be the best thing ever. Do you have other documentaries in mind? Given how the time frame that you put this, it doesn't seem like you're popping out documentaries every year. So do you have a long-term plan of like another documentary that we might see like in 2030?
I do want to do more of a narrative feature, get away from the doc for a sec, and something that I would be featured in that I'd love to do. I've had there's these they call boda bodas. There's basically motorcycle taxis that
Right.
take over the streets in Kampala and all the major towns and cities in Uganda. And I've just been fascinated by them. I've always wanted to tell a story about them and their world. I've also been fascinated about this. I don't know if you ever saw that feature film. I think it's called Lock.
Yeah.
The solo film, where he's in the car, solo actor in the car. So I've always wanted to do something like that in Uganda. It would just be me solo, getting from point A to point B and all the problems that happen in between. But basically, my thing is to do projects that are within my own means. That's how I've managed. I don't know how to work with a massive crew and I'm still at the do-it-yourself phase and wanting to execute things that are within my own means. So that would be the next project that I want to try to do, in a narrative feature with myself front and center.
That's such a great goal. Do you feel like as a director and maybe also as an actor that it's very easily that a person is very easily typecast, like that whatever they do first, then that's what they are expected to see in their next role? Did you ever feel like that when you got acting jobs, that the next script that you got was very similar to the previous one? And also as a director, do you get that sense as well?
Well, I think you could definitely get typecast if you're on something that's a huge hit that everyone's seen. But if you've done small projects that make their mark but aren't like mass consumption, then you can slip out of that typecasting phase. I know for myself, for a while, just because of my name, Ntare Guma Mbaho Mwine, I was getting certain roles, like I was being seen for certain like African roles all the time.
Right.
And I said to my reps at a certain point, I was like, it would be great to do something where I'm not putting on some African accent. I speak with, I was born in the States. I grew up for the most part here. And this is my natural speaking dialect. I said it would be great to be able to try to do something where I'm doing different dialects. But I remember I almost had the reverse. I remember I went in for a casting director once, and I was just, you do your chit chat, say hello, and I was just doing it in my normal accent. And then when it came to do the odd material, I switched into whatever African accent it was. And at the end of the audition, the casting director said, "You're not African enough." I was like, "What?" Because
What?
her point was that I was a first generation. I was born and raised in the States. So I didn't quite count for what she was looking for. But that for me just
God.
spoke to the thought everyone's looking for the authentic. You want what's authentic. You don't want necessarily uh, someone who has the skills to transform. You want to find the
Right.
real deal, like that real
Right.
person from that village.
You're just like pulling them out of the village right there and putting them in like an acting.
That's what they want to find. And I realized that showing dexterity sometimes is not to your advantage. So I went
Mm,
in from that point on, when I went in for auditions, I went in with that accent of the character. And I remember Alexa Fogel spoke about this with Idris Elba because he
right.
had the same thing, where he was going in with his British accent, trying to audition for these different roles and was throwing people off. And Alexa, who's an incredible casting director, and cast me in this new series, the Dennis Lehane series, Apple TV, that's coming out. You're asking about what's next. Instructed Idris, don't go in with your British accent. Try to just do the accent of the whatever the role is, and let's see what happened. And that was a turning point for him, and that was also a turning point for me.
Wow. Wow. That is a phenomenal story. I have learned so much from this conversation with you, and I'm not surprised because the film is fantastic. So this is an indie film podcast, love hyping other people's projects. I think throughout your career, you've shown how collaborative you are with other people and working. Certainly in your film, you show that. So is there I know you are excited about all the films at Slamdance. But is there any one or two that you can point out and say, I'm really excited to sit down and watch that film? And then the part two of this, is there like an indie film or director that you wish more people knew about? Like you talk with your friends and say, I wish X person, more people watch their films.
I'll hype up the film that's premiering before my film. It's called
Okay.
When the Smoke Clears.
Okay.
And it's about the firefighter, emergency care workers, I believe. I don't know if it's just a firefighter or emergency care workers, but who, as a result of the stress of the job, turn to psilocybin as a form of therapeutic treatment. And that, for me, I was really curious to see because I just worked on a TV series, the one that's coming out on Apple TV, and it's about the stress and work that goes into being a firefighter. So I'm really curious to see what they did with their documentary. And that's the top of my list. And that's the film that is screening just prior to my film.
That's awesome. And that's like extraordinarily relevant in Los Angeles right now.
Exactly. Sorry if I meant to add that as well, but you took the baton and ran with it.
You can always tell somebody who's a great actor, great performer, is that they'll just give, the segues will be like so easy because they're just like giving it to you on a plate. And I felt that way in this conversation. It's just so easy talking with you. The film is Memories of Love Returned. It is fantastic. Go see it either at Slamdance or another venue if you can. Ntare, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's been phenomenal conversation. I've learned so much from talking with you, and I'm cheering for your continued success.
Thank you, Ben. It's been a pleasure.